In this session, we discuss Playing the Tech Long Game, moderated by Ben Snowman, VP of Partnerships and Advisory at Mambu. Ben, all yours.
Thanks very much. So today we've got an incredible panel. We're going to talk about some of the customer and the technology trends that are shaping our industry over the next few years. With our panel today, we have Alastair, who's the Group Head of Strategy from NatWest. We have Mike, who's a partner and leads Alpha for Deloitte. And we have Eugene, who's the co-founder and CEO of Mambu. So we have the bank that delivers the service to the customer. We have the consultancy and solution provider that builds the technology that the bank therefore bases its offer to customers on. And we have the platform that's part of the solution that is built into the bank to deliver an incredible customer experience. So we have everyone here today. So I'm going to start today with this. According to Gartner, banks spend nearly $500 billion on technology a year. But according to McKinsey, customers don't really care. So they don't hate banks, but they certainly don't love banks. So Alastair, from NatWest, why do you think that is?
Well, I think there's probably lots of reasons about it, but I think a central theme that we've got to come through here is that whilst new technology can do wonderful things for banks, it isn't about that technology is creating a modern version of the same bank or putting the same services onto new kit. Technology has the potential to unlock new ideas about what it means to provide financial services to customers. And I think there's three aspects to that. Or put another way, there are three transformations that are going on underneath that. And if those transformations are not happening, then it is just an expensive way of doing old things on new kit. And I think those three transformations, just to be transparent, are around three things. First of all, is how we create value for our customers. We have to recognize that historically, what we thought we did as a bank was maturity transformation. What we did was effectively we're a treasury and we take in loans from customers and we give loans to suppliers. That's still true, but what we need to focus more on is how do we help our customers have financially healthy lives and develop and sustain financially healthy habits. The second one, which I think is related, is an architectural transformation. I don't mean a technical architecture. I mean a logical architectural transformation. That the bank of the future is somehow drawn away from being stuck in this sort of account-based model where I have an account with the bank. I know exactly how much the bank owes me, or I owe the bank. But actually, it's not a very lucid way of helping me run my financial services life. What we need is the hard wire between customer, product, and account to be merged apart so that the customer can be seen holistically. So that logical architecture, I think, is a second different thing. Again, technology can totally enable that, but that's not a technology problem, that's a business problem. And the third thing is changing the way we change. I think that we have to change in a way that creates new forms of order and pattern. We're going to move to a microservices structure or an event-based structure for the bank. It means that we have to have flexibility about how we create those services, but utter rigidity about the patterns by which how they interact with each other. And that ability to be flexible about this and utterly dictatorial about that is a different way of changing. I think if we focused on those three aspects of what the transformation is about, then the technology can unlock incredible value for customers. But without it, it's just same old bank, but in the cloud.
Same bank, same thing. So arguably what you're saying for your first point, Alastair, is that the banking business model, if you like, at the moment is thrust upon a customer. And as a result of that, that's why customers have this kind of neutral response. So Mike, maybe I can turn over to you. So with what you're doing at Deloitte with Alpha, you'll certainly have a perspective on the future, and you'll certainly have a view of what the customer trends are likely to be that will pull banks into the future. And what are some of the topics that you're seeing there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I maybe even go back to the way the question was stated. So about it being kind of neutral, and I would agree with half of that. I'd agree that it is neutral. Like customers' perception of banking right now is kind of neutral. But I would say a huge amount of progress. Well, huge maybe is a relative term, but progress has certainly been made in terms of customers' attitude towards banking. When you take it of where they were in the financial crisis and the change that's happened around, internally, in kind of the banking world, we can see it, but the change in kind of governance and priorities of banks has done a lot to regain customers' trust. But to be honest, that's got them back to neutral from where they are. So I don't think it'd be correct to say that like progress hasn't been made. It's just doing nothing. But banks have a job to get back to neutral. The challenge of the sort of affinity to their brand and that sort of continuing to kind of excite customers, that's just a mammoth task, right? For any brand and industry that's been around as long as banking has, to change that perception of their brand is huge, right? It's certainly not going to be to Alastair's point, it's not going to be the technology alone that's going to do it. It's got a role to play from our side in helping do it, but it's not what matters to the customer, right? What matters is the experience, which Alastair, I totally agree with what he said around evolving that experience, evolving maybe not even strong enough a phrase, right? Reimagining that how we serve our customers and how we serve their financial needs and their financial health. The other bit, and it's strange for me to be saying this, as probably my background is more of a technologist, right? But there's a lot of work to do to just get the brand and even how you communicate with your customers and talk about your roadmap and evolve your solutions. That the problem is getting harder. We do sort of generational surveys every kind of quarter. We move through the sort of generations, and our most recent one was Generation Z, right? And they have a natural lack of affinity to the traditional bank brands, and they just have an immediate better trust and response to the kind of new generation, the neobanks that are coming through. And there's a lot of and that problem's going to get bigger as that generation becomes more relevant and more important, right? And you're starting from a point that they just don't associate themselves with those brands, right? And that's a big undertaking. It's not impossible, but it's not something that's going to happen overnight, right? And there's lots of things that need to be kind of done to do it. But again, I agree with kind of Alastair's point around what needs to be done. We need to look at how we kind of reimagine that experience. And then we need to look at how do we leverage technology. Well, actually, it's more, I think Alastair made this point, it's more about how do we get better at change? How do we make technology, and I don't even just mean the sort of code and computer technology, but even the processes, et cetera, we have in branches and call centers, et cetera. How do we stop that getting in our way? Because the customers, they don't see that complexity that we see, right? They don't understand why if they get handed from one person in the call center and another person in the call center, they've got to explain their problem. Again, they're like, why haven't you fixed that? They don't understand that if they're existing customers, why is it harder for them to have to go through this approval process to get a loan? They don't understand that legacy complexity that we're wrestling with, and nor should they necessarily have to, right? They just want the service. So, and to really address a lot of those fundamental problems, we need to get better execution.
To summarize, I think what I'm hearing is that banks have played catch up over the last decade, which is why they're in the neutral position that they are. And that's actually a really good achievement given how difficult maybe the world was some time ago. But what we need to do now as an industry is actually more closely engage with, the next generation to really co-create and design, for the future and kind of align with the needs and wants of that next generation. I'm going to turn to go on, you were going to say something.
I was going to say, and to build the capability to execute that.
And build the capability. I'm going to turn to Eugene now. So in a decade, Eugene, you kind of started Mambu from nothing, and now we're one of the sort of market leaders in this space. And you must have, we've got a couple of hundred clients, and you must have met many over the last decade. How have you seen the demands from those clients change over time? And sitting in the position that you are at now, what do you think the kind of trends are, if you like, that will, modify and shape the industry over the next few years?
I think I would say the biggest thing that I've seen change is the mentality of approaching this, of initially approaching it as a tech problem, and over the last few years, I think the recognition that this is actually a business, or better yet, a customer problem. So I'd say a lot of conversations that I've had in the earlier years were really just taking a look at the technology right away. So you won't be talking to the business leaders, you'll be talking to a technologist right away and say, okay, we have these old systems, tell me how Mambu can solve it, how they can make it better, et cetera. And now, of course, we still talk to technologists, but it comes out actually much later. Now we're talking about the business side and saying, here are the business lines that are working really well. Here are the brands that we're thinking of creating. Here are the new products and services that we believe could be valuable in the market. And how can we use technology in a new way of thinking, including a platform like Mambu, but also all the other technology that's out there to create these new propositions. And I think that's really been the sort of the big shift that I've seen, and I think that's a really critical one, because technology at the end is an enabler. And as we were saying, a lot of that's been built up in banking has basically been, pre-technology, in the sense of it was pre-internet, pre-iPhone, pre-modern technology, and you designed products and services which were built for that world, in terms of customers would interact with you with paper and pencil, and that's how you would communicate internally as an organization. You wouldn't have access to massive data, so that was just simply the reality of the world. And now you have to acknowledge that the reality of the world is very different today, and also, importantly enough, I think everyone here would acknowledge that it's also going to be very different in a couple of years' time, so we can all kind of speculate where. But the point is, it's only going to continue to accelerate. So I think starting with a customer is the biggest thing. I think that's changed with the mentality of how does technology really play a role.
And I think that's the common theme that we're hearing today. The business model, needs to change. We need to work with customers, and to some extent, Eugene, you're saying the same thing. As a technology business, we need to go in there with the mindset of solving for a customer and a business problem rather than a kind of technology replacement, so to speak.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So if we move on to the technology itself now for a second, what's very common to see now is, in the fintech world at least, is, and again over the last decade, we've had a number of players that have stood up which, specialize in a particular area. They remove friction, they, reduce costs, they improve customer experience and all those sorts of things. And actually the ecosystem's emerging. And again, if we talk Mambu for a second, with a core platform and with an ecosystem of 70 plus partners, and it's the combination of that our clients certainly are finding attractive in the market. So Alastair, if I come to you for a second, from the perspective of NatWest, what's your approach and attitude to, say, partnering with fintechs, either in the way that I just described or in a more specific case? Is it something that's important to NatWest? Is it an important part of the strategy for the future? Because it fundamentally underpins your technology strategy, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be transparent, we have 4 strategic themes in our group strategic intent, and number 3 is partner and innovate. So we definitely view, we were relatively early a few years ago as an incumbent bank in sort of creating a set of ventures. And separately, we'd done some work on partnering, and then we realized subsequently that all ventures are partnerships and all partnerships are ventures. That you rarely do a new venture without finding new players to bring capabilities to bear on that. So actually, a venture isn't something you do on your own. But equally, you don't partner with people to reproduce the current. You partner to co-create the future. And so what we're now realizing is that partnering and venturing are 2 sides of the same thing. And then I think more generally to your point, Ben, the reality of our industry has been, everybody did it themselves. Everybody has their own customer experience, their own products and their own platforms and their own front to back experience. Well, we know other industries have reorganized horizontally.
We've spoken previously about almost an industrial revolution in financial technology happening now. Cloud, APIs, that's kind of fairly normal, and part of what you as a services business, a consultancy, take to market is a perspective on that, and also the solutions to be able to deliver on that. So it'd just be good to hear your perspective on, some of the technology trends that you see coming as well.
Yeah. So I mean, there's been a constant wave of waves of disruption that have rolled through all industries, and not least financial services, over the hundreds of years, including kind of the digitization of cash, et cetera, et cetera. But most recently in the digital age, we see, somewhat simplifying it, but we see kind of 2 waves of disruption that have rolled through. And we are big believers in, absolutely, it's been talked about, that ultimately it's about what you do with those disruptive waves in terms of serving your customers and partnering with others to do so. But we are also believers that, because we've seen it happen over the millennium, that new technology, new innovations drive new ways of doing things. Right? We've seen it with the Stone Age and the Iron Age, and more recently with the canals and railways and the steam engine. And in our view, there's two of those waves that have rolled through. One that's rolling through quite aggressively at the moment. One that maybe started a little bit further, a little bit longer ago, which was the first one was the evolution of the digital channel, and that was really started with the telephone, the evolution of the digital channel, right? Telephone, internet, smartphone, social. Now we have voice, watch. I have a obsession, a passion with neural link. I have this view of being able to send my kids to Disneyland by touching a button on the side of their head, right? We've been in that wave for a while, and actually banks have been pretty good at responding to it. They when you look at what they've achieved in terms of channel, getting people onto telephone banking, getting people onto internet banking, getting people onto mobile banking, they've handled it pretty well. But largely that's just been sort of by delivering those new channels and looking at how do we make that experience better on those channels, how can we use those channels to be better. But a lot of what's below that has stayed the same inside of the banks. The second wave we've seen come through has been driven by a different set of technologies. It's been driven by cloud, AI, APIs, even practices like Agile and DevSecOps. And that's what we refer to as the sort of new means of manufacture. And again, it's a bit like the steam engine did to the industrial age. It is fundamentally shifting how we produce and how we build things, right? And there's a real challenge to any business, not just banks. Any business has been around for a while to make the shift to those. And again, like any other shift in age that we've seen, we see power shifts happen as new businesses are born in the new world. And are designed around those new ways, those new tools, be them arrows or steam engines or cloud, right? And it's hard for existing businesses to make the shift, and it takes years to do so. And if they don't, again, we tend to see power shifts. And we're in the middle of that now. It's not a fast thing, right? It's not going to happen overnight. It's years, right? But it is happening right now. But to the point that kind of as Alastair and yourself, Ben, and Eugene said, like, what you do with that, like the challenge is twofold. It's how do we make that transformation to that new means of manufacture, and how do we deliver that better experience, that better addressing of needs for our customers, and you got to tackle both, right? And when you look into the future of what, my view on where banking goes, like there's lots of kind of possibilities. We can see something starting to spark at the moment, right? You know, banking as a service, embedded finance, more fluid-based financial products rather than sort of signing up to things for years, right? Ability to kind of switch and change, right? We can see lots of different kind of possibilities, but what you can see consistently is they're all enabled by that new means of manufacturing, those new channels. I say, like, so banks want to play, like, in that world. They've got to look at how do they transform, and then what are they going to do? What are the things that they're going to do? They're going to deliver.
So you've just raised there a really interesting point, which comes back to I think you talked about the fluid finance there for a moment. I think that was the expression that you used, and to me, it's I guess the question, Eugene, to you is, you know, we're talking about banking, we're talking about financial services, we're talking about neobanks and so forth. But when you take a step back and look at the customer's life, they still transact in merchants. 55% of e-commerce now is over the phone. That's making a payment, which arguably is a form of financial service, right? And the notion of payments and lending is starting to blur with buy now, pay later. So from the perspective that you have, Eugene, which was, you know, taking a bet on cloud 10 years ago for a low cost, you know, access, you know, into the financial services world, how do you see the industry, again, maturing on the basis of a technology platform that can be fairly flexible and applied to different contexts?
So I think what's different right now is, as we were saying, there was incremental change, but it was always sort of sequential. You sort of have, you know, you'd have a phone, and then you just deal with that technology. You never have internet or web access, and that would be one thing. And now what you're seeing is basically so many different technologies which can be either used by the financial institution or by the end customers to achieve their financial goals, and they're all coming in from both sides. They're both enabling technologies, whether it's blockchain or AI, or even just fundamentally different architectures, or consuming technology, as you said, that I can pay with stuff with a QR code or with my watch and so forth, and all of those are coming at the same time. And that's why I'm referring to what I think is happening right now, sort of as a fintech era, of the fact that you're having all of these new technologies, and organizations have to then rethink of how they're able to adopt to all of these things at the same time. And that's why you kind of have this sort of replatforming from a customer perspective, because at the end, the thing that customers still want is, nobody really wants banking. They want to, they want to go pay for their lunch, or they want to be able to finance kitchen renovation, right? That's the thing that they actually really want. They don't want to get a loan or do a payment with blockchain or anything else, right? A tiny percentage of the world actually cares about banking, and everyone else cares about actually living their lives, basically. And so I think when we would kind of look back on this era right now, it's going to be similar to how, we would look back on, the internet days of 25 years ago, where people would talk about being, I'm an online company and I'm an internet company. Well, no one's going to say that nowadays. That would be ridiculous. Of course you have an online presence. Of course you use the internet. So I think a lot of the same principles that we have right now, it will be looked back on the same way. The whole fintech thing will be, anyone who's successful in it will be working like a tech company, in the sense of they're always adopting, they're always very agile, they're creating new products and services, and that's going to be the behavior of anyone providing financial services in the future. And no one's going to call themselves a fintech in the future, because, well, at that point, if you're not one, then you probably don't really exist.
Yeah. So this brings me maybe to the last point of the discussion, which is actually the how do we do that? Because what you've just described is very different to what happens today. And so Eugene, in your experience, so again, over the last decade and what you can see coming up, how do you see clients actually adapting to that and being able to candidly do something about it? Because it's quite a big shift to how things work today.
Yeah, so I think what I was saying was the fact that in previous states of when you had disruptive or fundamentally different technology, whether it's phone or internet or mobile, they were all coming sort of in sequence, and the organization can fundamentally look at that technology and see, how do I best kind of adopt that technology itself. But that way of thinking actually doesn't really apply right now, because there's no one particular technology itself that's the thing. It's actually about a new way of having a customer-centric and a very agile operating technology model. And the approach that I would say is relatively common across most organizations, where they're applying this principle is to places where you usually have relatively high amounts of volume. So that's, individual retail products, but also oftentimes small business, and also places where you have a lot of opportunity to leverage data and automation to both drive down costs and also create better products, better customer experiences. So that's where it's all sort of starting right now. And if you look at, most banks' roadmaps, then the things where they're doing, corporate lending or trade finance, those are all spaces which they see the same principles can be applied to, but probably are not the highest priority from the end customer perspective. And so that kind of becomes their business transformation roadmap, and then applying different technologies as they go through that.
To solve the customer problem.
Exactly.
So Mike, coming to you, Deloitte, how would you consider a change program? So Eugene's talked very much around the roadmap being around solving customer and customer problems, if you like, and those are the use cases, and you take the prioritization and you take it from there. From a change program, however, and maybe even the cultural change within a large organization, it can be a really tough way to even get to that position that Eugene's described. So what's your experience around the change and the transformation from Deloitte's perspective?
Yeah, it's massive, right? It's just hard, right? There's no doubt that this is a multi-year journey to achieve that degree of transformation. Believe that any transformation in an organization that serves customers does need to be driven by delivering value to those customers and to the colleagues inside of those businesses, because much like you said, 99.9% of customers don't care about the complexities that we deal with in being banks. About 95% of the people that actually work in the bank don't particularly care about it either, right? They don't care about moving apps to the cloud, or they care about serving their customers, getting them the products that they and services and addressing their needs. That's what they care about, right? So if you want to transform an organization, you need to do that by tapping what makes them tick, which is serving the customers. So first of all, I believe that transformation needs to be driven by delivering business value. Therefore, you need to set a target of where you're trying to get to, right? What are you trying to go after in terms of what are you trying to do in terms of addressing customer needs where maybe you own that experience? Like, so how do you, I love what Alastair said earlier about like partnering and venturing, two sides of the same coin, and I totally agree, right? But how are you going to partner with others to better serve those end-to-end needs of the customer, right? So that's where you are the primary relationship point. But also, how are you going to participate in other ecosystems as well? How are you going to take those products and services that you specialize in and offer them through into end-to-end customer needs where you don't potentially own the primary relationship, like where it's potentially helping small businesses to trade internationally, where maybe that relationship is more akin to working with Amazon or working with a logistics provider. How are you going to provide services into that? So I think banks need to look at, well, what are we going to do in those kind of two areas where we own the experience and we participate with other people? So first of all, set that vision, set that target, and don't worry if it evolves, right? But set a target. At least we need to know what we're shooting for, right? Sort of 3, 4, 5 years out. But similarly, set a target around what do you want your organization to look like, right? And again, it doesn't matter if it changes, it will change, right? But like, what type of structure, business, how do we want to work, right? Like, how do we think that's gonna look and gonna play out in that 3 to 5 year window? And the last one is then similarly set a target. Again, doesn't matter if it changes, it will change, around where you want to go with technology, right? And where you want to, what you want to do on your stuff. And that's, I say, starting with the where do we want to go as a business, right? And then what does that mean for organization? What does it mean for technology? So set those targets, right? And it doesn't need to be 200-page documents, stuff like that, but just set a vision that everybody can kind of get behind and accept that will evolve, right? And then work out what's your journey to get there and drive that journey through delivery of value, right? And in that delivery of value, it's not just the new things, it's also how do you, there is also a lot should be put on optimizing the existing things you do. How do we stop that person having to give their details twice, or how do we make that onboarding journey better? How do we make those decisions around getting access to lending better? So what is that roadmap of value you're going to deliver? And then what are the new capabilities? When I say capability, I mean the mixture of organization and technology that you're going to deliver along that journey. And it's not just about delivering those capabilities to solve the point problems as you go through, but how are you going to use that value that's delivering to customers, use those business goals, and how are you going to build long-term capabilities? How are you going to start to modernize parts of your organization as you move through? And because you've got that target state that will evolve, right, you kind of know how to build those capabilities as long-term things, not just the kind of tactical solution. And that kind of leads to the last point for me, which is how you get started in this, right? Besides doing that kind of plan bit. And that's one of the first things where banks are incredibly capable nowadays, right? So how much support they need from is dependent on the organization, right? But the bit we can really help with is how do we help establish that foundational capability? How do we help establish that foundational platform? How do we help establish that foundational organization? How do we get that? Even if we haven't yet started moving the capabilities onto it, how do we establish the base that then we're going to start moving, you know, the fundamental cloud platform, the fundamental organization structure, et cetera, that then we can start building those capabilities onto? How do we jumpstart you on that bit? Because that's commodity and it's not going to differentiate you. Right, so take the kind of to the point that Alastair made earlier, kind of in partnering, take that foot up, and then focus on actually the bit that matters, which is how do you deal with the particular organizational change of your people? How do you deal with the particular unique technology challenges you have of some system over there that's 15 years old and we haven't put in APIs yet, or the unique experiences and needs that you want to address and partnerships that you want to deliver for your customers. So it's like establish that end state that you're shooting for, accepting it, evolve. Have a view of what that plan is to get there, driven by the value you're trying to deliver to customers and to your colleagues. And then the first step is establish that foundation that you can build on, and then start building those new capabilities and those things onto it, is the approach that we take.
Mike, thanks very much. So I'm going to draw the discussion to an end now. I think the big takeaway for me was that it's all about the customer. Start with the customer, start with the business problem. The technology is there and the technology is maturing, and therefore it's about the roadmap that should be led by the customer, led by the business problem to move into this new era. So I'd like to thank Eugene, Mike, and Alastair for joining us today. Thanks very much. Thanks to those of you who've watched this, and enjoy the rest of the chapters.